On our earth, before the printing press was invented, before writing was invented, poetry flourished. That's why we know that poetry is like bread. It should be shared by all, by scholars and by peasants, by all, our vast, incredible, extraordinary family of humanity. That was Pablo Neruda. I'm Bob Holman, and this is the Poetry is Bread podcast, where poetry challenges us, makes us think, and with imagination and courage, changes the world. You know, Joy Harjo is the only poet I know who could get kicked upstairs when she's leaving a 2 or was that 3-year stint as Poet Laureate of the U.S. The COVID years.
Yes, it turned into 3 years because of COVID.
Joy is the author of 9 books of poetry, including the highly acclaimed An American Sunrise, several plays, children's books, 2 memoirs, and she's got many honors, the Ruth Lily Prize for Lifetime Achievement from the Poetry Foundation, the Academy of American Poets Wallace Stevens Award, 2 NEA fellowships, Guggenheim. As a musician and performer, Harjo has produced 7 award-winning music albums, including the newest, I Pray for My Enemies. Anushik Joy. Anushik is the Lenape word for welcome, thank you. And of course, I am standing here on Lenape land, above the shop, the Bowery Poetry Club in Manhattan. And where are you, may I ask?
I'm here in Tulsa, Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Muscogee Creek Nation Reservation.
And Muto, is that the way you say thank you in Muscogee?
Maro.
Okay, I'm doing better. Maro. Yes. Well, thank you for being Poetry is Bread today. And I love starting with a place because that's where you seem to always be starting from, wherever it is. And as you know, you and I have met in various places around the world, Nicaragua and Hawaii.
Yes, and India.
India.
Yeah, Calcutta.
But I'm thinking, Calcutta for the book fair. Thank you, Ram Devanini. And I was thinking about Hawaii and the word, well, it's not quite place, the word piko. You know that word? Piko in Hawaiian is where you stand under the piko, and then the whole community gathers under that garland up there, that garland of living greens. It's also the umbilical cord. And in Hawaii, when somebody asks you, where are you from? Your parents take your umbilical cord and bury it in some place that they know is where you're from, and that's where you're from. I've always thought that was so beautiful.
I always say that's why I go to this one shop, because it's across the street from St. John's Hospital, where I was born here in Tulsa. And I figured, well, the incinerator, they probably incinerated all those kinds of things. There was no ceremony, important ceremonial recognition for those, the place of birth and even, even the place of transformation, or the place of dying and moving on to the next place.
Well, you have returned to Tulsa. You have returned to your place of birth. How does that feel?
It's, some people were surprised I came back. I mean, I'm known to be I started writing poetry in the Southwest in New Mexico and lived there probably most of my life, though I lived in Hawaii for a good period. And but I knew I would come back. My people are here. I'm very much involved with arts and cultures with my tribal nation, and it made sense that I come back so I could be useful here. It's my place of giving back.
You say you started writing poetry there. What was it that pushed you to write? What poems did you read?
Oh, in New Mexico, yes. I was on my way at University of New Mexico, and I was I got accepted and actually got funding because I was going into pre-med. But after one semester, I was back in the art studio. And then I started hearing poetry. I met native poets. I met Simon Ortiz. I read his poetry. Leslie Silko, who I knew as a poet before I knew her short stories and before I knew her fiction. And James Welch, his Winter in the Blood. And University of New Mexico used to have a really good writing series. And I got to hear Galway Cannell, the poet I found Pablo Neruda. I mean, the Floricanto performances were going on. I met Ricardo Sanchez Alurista. There was just, it seemed to be there seemed to be a major, there is a highway, I-40 and Route 66 going through there. But, poetry does that. It follows just like music. Music followed the Mississippi River and up the Arkansas River,
Oh,
just
yeah.
like blues and jazz
Down the
does. Well,
blues
poetry
trail.
also,
Yeah.
the poetry also follows highways.
Well, I happen to know, at least I read someplace, that you, when you were quite young, read the treasury of poetry for children, and that's where you famously said that poetry is singing on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, I guess it's.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, next.
Oh, come on. Tell me about those poems there. They pushed you too, didn't you? Because you were an artist when you were in Indian school, right? Or at least that's where you started?
Yes,
Painter.
that's what. Yeah, I was a painting and drawing major, but by the second semester, I uh, I I signed up for drama class and wound up one of only two high school students in a postgraduate. All the rest were postgraduate students in a theater ensemble that was doing such was getting the attention of people in New York. Jose Limon, the dancer, came out to see what we were doing because we were including dance in our plays and masks and all kinds of. It was a very exciting time for Native art. Period. In painting and sculpture, all kinds of things, and it was and for theater it was the same thing. So I wound up, even though I was considered one of the shyest kids, I wound up in that theater group, and we went on tour with our performances.
A poem of yours was recently published in the New Yorker, and it seems perfect for the Poetry is Bread podcast. Could you read us Ordinary Morning?
Yes, this is I guess it could be called an ekphrastic poem in the sense that I was moved to write this poem from an image. And I guess this poem too is sometimes, I guess I go to poetry when I don't know where to put something. It's too big, too painful, too amazing. And this came from an image, and it was an image in the New York Times of a park. It could be in anybody's neighborhood, a little park with a bench and uh, a loaf of bread with a little snow on it. But there was a pool of blood under the bench where a father and his daughter had been sitting enjoying the morning, and then they were gone from mortar. An ordinary morning. We left for the park a little later than usual, my old father and I, though we knew the war was on us. Blood hunger has an endless stomach. I wanted to keep the morning from its mouth. He needed his walk to soften his joints, and we had a daily appointment with the birds. New green was peeking from the winter earth. The birds who had not scattered to the forests after the first detonations kept to their early spring rituals. Like us, they were beginning to sing their spring songs and were making new ones. We could not let war steal everything. In the park, my old father, hobbled by an older war, by worries over the evil let loose among us, found joy in watching the children, feeding the birds, and telling the stories he never tired of. And for us who loved him, well, those old stories made a circle of knowledge and affection. We bought a loaf of bread. The baker stayed on to help keep the ritual of our lives fastened into place. Our genealogies of bones are stacked in the graveyard and live in the stories we shared this morning, the baker and us. We will go on, even if there is only one standing in a sea of blood and loss, one who will tell the story of who we were and how we fought for an ordinary morning like this one, when the earth was beginning to wake from the cold season. Old Father, you tore off a piece of bread for the birds gathered at your feet. They knew to find us here, this park bench, this prayer of blessing for the continuum of living. The fire took you first, Old Father. I was stunned. The sun exploded. Then I was gone, following you, the way I always did, first with my eyes, then when I learned to toddle. A bird with breadcrumbs in its beak fled to the top of the closest standing tree. My mother, your wife, was a girl again. Then you left the wedding feast as you walked hand in hand to begin a story. I was a thought in the shape of a spring flower emerging from a blood-soaked earth. How we lived and lived and lived and loved our living. We did not want to let it go.
It's a beautiful poem. I had no idea it was based on a photograph, probably of Ukraine. Seems to me, yeah. But what also was striking to me is that it's a poem about your the eye of the poem, your father, and you've written a lot of poems about your father, and yet your father left your family when you were quite young. Um, Yet he seems to be still a constant in in your in your life, in your continuity, in your poetry.
I suppose. I mean, that wasn't my fault. I was speaking with, a different but as the woman in the poem, and I had a very different relationship with my father, though I was the person there at the end who he wouldn't let anyone take care of him. He didn't get to that point, but I was the one left standing with him, so to speak. Actually, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, well, it's a lovely poem. I love it when the bread becomes something more than just nurturing for 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 you and your papa. When it becomes something that his first action with that loaf is to tear off a piece and give it to the birds. You know, the birds then continue as the
Oh, I
explosion
like the
hits.
way it surprised me because I was full of I think we all, through all of this period, we've been through a lot collectively, and sometimes it gets to be too much. I think for me, that's where I go to poetry, either to read it or to, if I have a heartache I can't bear. And then when you see things, all over it with, young men getting killed in the street for the color just because they have dark skin, or you see these things happen, and what do we do, what can we do? I mean, we there's things we can do in our neighborhoods and speaking out, but sometimes the heartache is too much to bear. And when I saw that image and thought of those, this older man and his daughter sitting out on the park bench, and
Mm.
then they were gone, and it's like, what kind of what kind of human beings are we?
Do you think that poetry can heal this kind of pain?
Well, I don't know about. I've always, said, I go to poetry, or I'm here in my work, whatever I do, I'm motivated by healing and by just the need for justice. And sometimes I don't know. I know that it helps, that we all carry a part of the story. We all carry a part of the tale, and I guess for me, it's as a witness. And at least if there's a witness, you're not alone, and you don't have to carry it by yourself.
That sounds like a good job for poetry and gives us a job as poets. Um, you, of course, are also a musician. And I say also because sometimes I think that, like Sappho sung, that the job of poet musician is actually can be thought of as one and the same. If you remember, we thought of this podcast as being a discussion of poetry and song, but I'm thinking now about the larger way of looking at it, the question of language itself, language and music, um, and how they relate to each other. Does that have anything of happenstance for your own work?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think I'm very rhythm oriented. And just like speaking right now, I mean, there's rhythm in everything, even in the pauses and even in the asking the questions, there's pauses, there's stresses, there's sound, the sonic qualities of sound and so on. And when you go back to the roots of poetry, you'll always find music, and you will always find where there's music, there's dance. And so they all kind of go together. It's in this particular world, they are often appear more separate, but at the root, I don't think they are.
Yeah, that's right. For 40,000 years before the printing press, before writing, as Neruda says, there was poetry for 40,000 years there that
Right,
um, we
before.
tend to write off because now we've got this wonderful thing called the book, which also seems to be maybe a thing of the past now. But yes, the little melodies that float in, listening to you when you quote read your poems, because I wouldn't call them performing, but the idea that you're reading them, that's not true either. Sometimes you break into melody in your what call recitation in your reading of the poem. Um, what pushes you in that direction?
Well, I don't know. It's like an ordinary morning. I'm working on a song version. I think the poem, the lines and the phrasing in it it will lend itself very much to a song and make a chorus. I was trying to think of how I would make the chorus.
What do you think the chorus might be? The hook.
Yeah, the hook. Oh man. Let's see. The thing I think that would probably lend itself best is we will go on, even if there is only one standing in a sea of blood or loss. One who will tell the story of who we were.
One who will tell the story. That's what you and I'm still thinking of that bird, that sparrow flying off with that piece of bread as if it were, some kind of coded message for some bird that's going to read it over there and tell it to those peace-loving people on the other side of the mountain.
Yeah, that surprised me in the poem. I didn't say sparrow, but I was thinking, well, it could be, the little bird, and what a difference it makes between if you had a crow or a pterodactyl or a pterodactyl or what kind of bird. Totally shifts the poem.
So I'm thinking about the "Had It Up to Here" round dance, which is which one of my favorite songs of yours. That's how I learned it first, was hearing it on your Native Joy for Real, which was an album that changed my life. Um, did that start off as a poem? Because there's such a spoken piece in the song.
No, it didn't. I wrote that as a song, and if I were to do it again, I don't think I'm playing sax in it. and I'd be blowing a lot of sax through there and doing, improvising and doing stuff. And no, it started out, I knew I was going to bring Charlie Hill, and we missed Charlie. Oneida comedian, Richard Pryor opened the door for him, and he became a good friend of mine. And so I was living in LA then, and I thought, I'm going to bring Charlie and I'm going to do something. I had an idea for a song that would start out one way, an argument, and turn into a really good dance tune. And so I had some of it was a very small part. Some of it was scripted, and then the two of us totally went off, and it turned into what it turned into. And I love how that happened. Although I had a very good friend in the industry, I guess, who loved the album until he got to that song, and he was so upset. He said, this doesn't fit with everything else, and how can you put that in there? He's not singing in tune, I didn't auto tune him or anything, and that's not what it was about. It was like some, a guy and a girl. Usually these round dance songs are one voice. There's one voice, and usually a male voice, singing and telling their part of the story, like, where did she go? I'm da 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 da, like 49 songs, I don't care if you're married 16 times, I'll get you yet. Da da da, there's all kinds of songs. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make two voices. I went in with this idea. I'm going to make two voices, a male and a female, and have it, erupt. And I'm not sure exactly where it's going to go. And then it turned into, and then it would go into this dance thing, this kind of fun dance thing, groove, and then end. And I wasn't sure how it was going to end. And that's how it happened. We went in the studio and just had fun.
Yeah, and the way that it has that, the round dance, native, the drumming, and the way it explodes with other melodies. It's just an amazing piece. What do you say we take a little break, you and me, and we can actually hear the Had It Up to Here round dance.
And her high-heeled shoes and her skirt up to here and her blonde hair down to there. When you dance right past with her, it gives me the blues. You have the sweetest step and double time. It's just not fair. But how can I tell you that I love you when you don't even care?
Boyfriend and his white man ways. You hold him in your shawl. It makes me crazed. I like the way you step so high beside me. But how can I tell you, babe, you don't talk to me? Where I, oh. this place all the time. Everybody knew you. Now it seems like too many people know you here. So how can I tell you these things? You don't even talk to me anymore. You don't even call me up anymore. You don't even look at me anymore. You don't even see me anymore. But if you come close to me, I'll tell you how much I love you, honey. How much I love you, honey.
I don't like your girlfriend.
But
I never liked any of your girlfriends. None of them. Not your Sue, not your Comanche sweetheart, not your Shining Shoshone, not your Get Down Dene, not your too fast girlfriend with her up to here and her down to there and her here down to everywhere. You know, it looks bad on me.
are you done?
You do this to me.
Jeez.
To me, honey, hey, yeah.
If you come close to me, honey,
I will have to tell you.
I will have to tell you
how much I love you.
How much I love you.
Hey, hey, hey.
Are you done? Jeez.
Too much.
Went out for a couple of drinks and
Party.
a couple of smokes.
Not enough.
Didn't mean anything.
Rent.
I mean.
Not enough.
I woke up on the floor with her
Uptime. Too
arms
much.
around her, but she
Downtime. Too much.
passed out, and I was just trying to see if she was still breathing. But
run around.
you read things into it.
Man.
So, Joy, you said that you wanted to play some saxophone on that tune. I love your saxophone. As a matter of fact, I remember when we were coming back from the Calcutta airport and we were reading the signs on the back of the trucks that said, "Please honk." Now, only in India do they say please. It's as if you're driving by the sense of sound, you know, get out of my way, or here I come. I'm passing you now. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And then you pulled out your black saxophone and started to play to the traffic. True story.
Yeah, it said something about, I photographed those. It said, honk your horn or something like that. Yeah, I brought my horn there. And there was a moment there, too, when we went to visit a village outside Shantiniketan where, and a lot of native villages are like this, is they send out a welcoming group and then you have to respond in turn, usually musically. And I remember Gautam pushing me forward, made me get my saxophone out, and pushed me forward with the saxophone to play. And they had never heard anything quite like that.
Oh, that's a beautiful
And I just
story.
played.
The great Baal poets, the street poets of that part of India. But you didn't grow up playing the saxophone. Give us that part of the story.
Yes, I've always loved music, and when I was growing up and we were with my father, Tulsa was known as a big center of country swing, music town. You know, Leon Russell came from here. I'm a block away from Kane's Ballroom, one of the major dance music bars that's still open, and we used to have a lot of those musicians at our house because my mother wrote songs and would go, make demos trying to get her music out there. And so I came to poetry really because of lyrics and music and then poetry, the poetry my mother would recite. And it was we had band in school, and I played clarinet for a couple of years. It was, once a week we'd go into the band room and play. I didn't have lessons. I always wanted to learn to play piano, but we couldn't afford a piano. It used to really bug me because I think here we have a piano teacher right across the street, but we don't have a piano. And but then when I went to junior high and I was in band that first semester, and the band teacher wouldn't let. He said we need some alto sax players, and he wouldn't let the girls play a sax.
Oh.
So I wound up quitting band, and then my stepfather, when my stepfather came along, there was no music. Yeah, the house would go silent when he came back, and we.
When did you start playing the sax?
I didn't start playing, so I walked away from music, period, and I picked up a sax. I was almost 40
Oh, wow.
and I laid out the G blues scale. Our Tulsa schools way back, we had an arts curriculum. So I learned how to read music. And now I can read and I can sight read, but I mostly play by ear. I just listen and play things, and I love to improvise. But yeah, I started when I was almost 40. I have a wonderful friend, mentor from Italy who's been a great champion of my poetry. And I remember when I started playing sax, and she says, "No, you're going to ruin your gift. You're here as a poet." And I'm sure a lot of poetry, there's an attitude in the highest echelons of poetry that saxophones don't belong in the Hall of Poetry. And nor do they belong for the most part in the higher echelons of of like classical music. But I love the voice. It's the closest thing I can get. Like I did a show the other night here. I had a great band. I just had a blast. I didn't want to stop playing. And it's like the voice. I realize that the voice is close to the sound of my singing. I'm trying to get my singing voice there. It's getting there, but it's got the same. There's a sound quality to it.
The timbre.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, you said that your mother wrote lyrics. What kind of lyrics did she write?
Heartache ballad.
Oh, wow.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. Very, very big, very poignant. Do you remember any of them by any chance?
She did one called. I get it confused. There's a weeping willow tree. She loved. What is his name? Cole, Nat King Cole.
Nat King Cole. Oh.
Yeah, those kind of lyrics. It's kind of heartbreaky, just crooning lyrics.
Yeah.
I don't have any. I want to go over and dig through my sister has all my mom's stuff over somewhere over there where she lives, and I would love to go dig around. And I asked her the other day if she knew whether she had any of my mom's old demos.
Oh, wow, that would be something to hear.
It would be.
To sample some of that, huh?
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah. What's the difference between writing a song lyric and writing a poem?
Yeah, there is a difference. If it's a song lyric, the melody is, usually helps carry it along. And you're working with, certain kinds of meter or forms, or you make your own. I tend to make my own forms, which can be a little frustrating if you're always working in 4s and 8s. But if it's writing a poem, I don't know, I go about it differently, although many of my poems wind up as songs. Like I think An Ordinary Morning will wind up a song. A new poem of mine, Without, I want to make it into a song. And then sometimes I just sit and, I will write a song, write something as a song. I have a poem. I published it. Sometimes when I publish poems, I'll put in parentheses song. I have a song on my album, I Pray for My Enemies, that I wrote as a song called How Love Blows Through the Trees. And I submitted it for an anthology a literary anthology on COVID, and that year of being inside, and I knew they wouldn't take it. I said, "I'm sending you this," but knowing what I know, it's too song-like. It's not. It doesn't count as a poem. And I
Oh, we
was
can.
right. It was, it
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
bother me. It wasn't accepted. It didn't fit into, a literary poetry anthology.
Well, but then we can always argue about the literature Nobel going to Bob Dylan, which I know you think is a perfect choice, even if you weren't working for the center, but and which I agree with, but yeah, you'll find that element of poetry where Bob Dylan is not a poet, but a songwriter.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the roots. It goes really back to the roots and how it got separated and why, perhaps, which is another story.
Yeah, well, it's the old commercial story. Maybe we could have a commercial here, as a matter of fact. If a poem could be a commercial, you mentioned that Without is another poem that you're thinking of morphing, mm, transforming, and
Yeah.
transcending into a poem. Have you got that handy? Could you read that for us?
Yes, this is called Without. The world will keep trudging through time without us. When we lift from the story contest to fly home, we will be as falling stars to those watching from the edge of grief and heartbreak. Maybe then we will see the design of the two-minded creature and know why half the world fights righteously for greedy masters, and the other half is nailing it all back together through the smoke of cooking fires, lovers' trysts, and endless human industry. Maybe then, beloved rascal, we will find each other again in the timeless weave of breathing. We will sit under the trees in the shadow of earth's sorrows, watch hyenas drink rain, and laugh.
Wow. Great poem. Watch hyenas. Watch hyenas drink rain is one of the great images of our time. But I just can't see how that could become a song. Where do you see where's the rhythm? It sounds a little prosaic even at times. Where's the rhythm in there, Joy?
I would find it. Yeah.
I know you will.
I
I
know
know
I
you
could
will.
find it.
Yeah, that's a
It's
great poem.
almost like a 3/4.
Oh, a little
Yeah, it's almost
waltzy.
like a 3/4. The world will keep trudging through time without us. When we lift from the story contest to fly home, we will be as falling stars to those watching from the edge of grief and heartbreak. You see how it would work in like 3/4.
Wow. Well, I didn't see or hear how it could before, but now that we've heard actually the magic, folks, you've heard the magic here of how that poem can become a song. Um, I'm thinking about Sherwin Bitsui and his use of Navajo, the way that he drips his words across the pages in his great book Flood Song. Um, you're a painter, but have you ever been tempted to work the typography of the page into a more painterly or musical? Those words just drip for sure when he spaces them across the page, and you only see this one word to, which in to two.
Twelve. I love that. I love that poem of his, and I'm familiar with that language. But when I went to the University of New Mexico, and I was very involved with Native rights movements, and then I got permission to substitute Navajo for my foreign language requirement instead of French, and so I was studying Navajo when I was beginning to write poetry, and I think there's a connection there, and and I'm familiar with those lands, and so so when I read Sherwin Bitsui, I can see I'm immediately taken to place, and in the desert, water, I mean, water is primary. So to have two, 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 two dripping down the page in a way becomes more than just words on a page, but it also becomes uh, it almost like a prayer for rain at the same time in a desert landscape.
Um,
I love that. I think I that's the one we chose, not just me. We had a whole team of editors for when the light of the world was subdued, our songs came through.
right, which is the Norton anthology of what? How do you call it? The um, uh, native nations, poetry of native nations. You know, I mean, it's just
Yes.
remarkable that that book exists, and it's such a fantastic anthology. Go get it right now. And but it's you know the nomenclature is so uh, convoluted these days. You know, there's the native nations poetry, and there is the indigenous, and there is Native American, and there's even the word Indians, which is the word that Jim Northrup, the great Anishinaabe Ojibwe poet and storyteller, would tell me, Bob, you have to say Indian because that's what we are. We're Indians, and if you want, I'll take you to the casino and show you which of the slot machines is the Indian slot machine that really pays off. You know,
That sounds like him. Well, he's my generation, or a little bit. He's a little older. He was a little older than me, probably about 10 years. And a wonderful poet and storyteller, a
miss
really good
him.
storyteller. And it,
Yeah,
yeah, I do too. And we call our we grew up with
Indians. Yeah.
Indians. And then with, our tribal nations, we call each other by that. And then it was Native Americans is a term that it always irritates me because it came right out of
Mm,
academia.
yeah.
And I saw the whole term emerge out of academia, and now it's used, widely used. And but generally we go with our own tribal nations, the names of our own tribal nations.
Tribal nations is the way to go with that. Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good note, folks. If you are listening, and
Yeah.
I hope that you are. Well, let's talk about native languages now. It just seems there is, you know, like with Natalie Diaz and her work on the Mojave Dictionary. There's a strong movement to reinvigorate. Is that the right word? I don't know, but to take the Indian languages that have managed to survive through genocide and the horrors um, till now, and treat them. That's funny to me that you said that you learned Navajo as a foreign language. Come on, what is that? A little irony in there,
Yeah, isn't
you
that
know.
funny?
Yeah, but you
Yeah, a
yeah,
little.
you work with the Muscogee language. You put it in your books and your songs. What do you think about the endangered language movement towards in the Indian sphere?
Well, I think we're all moving towards that, because you come to when you're in the culture and then in the language, you realize that that's where, so much is carried there. Just like, poetry carries a lot of, you could probably take almost any poem, and it would be a mirror of even of a sliver of history of what's going on. And languages too, languages are like that. That's how we, um, why things mean, how things mean. It's all there in our languages. And languages really help define us as human beings. And so I think it's everywhere. I know that, you know, our tribal nation and others are working towards, several of us thinking about a cultural and arts and culture school with language as, necessary and primary in in what would be what's a Muscogee Creek education. A language would be central.
Right? To, if it needs to be spoken at home, as we learned in Hawaii with the Pananaleo. It needs, it needs to be spoken at school, and you need to hear that. If you hear, because kids are the greatest language learners of it all. They don't learn them; they just somehow are speaking them. And no matter
Hmm.
how many languages you seem to throw at them, they'll always speak. This is mommy's language. This is daddy's language, and it doesn't. This is just the way you talk to people. So you think that there's going to be this is a way to preserve culture and way to make it move forward.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think so. I mean, and diversity, whether it's diversity of plant life, diversity of language, of word choice, all of that goes into making a rich experience of living.
Well, did you when you got married? Did you take on some grandkids? How many grandkids do you got running around?
I don't know anymore because I have 7 by blood. I have 7 grandchildren and 2 great grandchildren through blood, but um I've had 6, 7, 9 that I've had for a long time of grandchildren through other through associations. And then when I got married, he has 5 children. I have, and then many other grandchildren and great grandchildren. And they keep adding, we keep adding them. And so I've become a matriarch of a very large family. And so people are always asking me for blurbs and this, that, and the other. And I had to cut it off somewhere. It's like, I can't do everything. you know,
Grandchildren are a great excuse
there's
for
can be,
not writing blurbs. Now I understand it. I was thought I was doing pretty
yeah,
good with
that's right.
5 grandchildren, who all are waiting to hear you. To read Remember and to hear you. Maybe you can give them a taste of what Remember sounds like now.
Okay, I will read it, and I don't have it right here. I've had it translated into Muscogee, and when for the final event of the U.S. Poet Laureate event in D.C., the last thing was one. I had a young Muscogee poet come up, Sterling Harjo's daughter, Portland Houghton Harjo, read a new poem. She read a wonderful new poem she wrote, and she's going to school in New York at Pratt, I think. And then I closed with a singer friend of mine, Jennifer Kreisberg, and we did the song Remember in Muscogee language and in English. And anyway, here it is in English. Remember, remember the sky you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon, know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn, that is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away to night. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father, he is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are, red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth, we are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember you are all people and all people are you. Remember you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember all is in motion, is growing as you. Remember language comes from this. Remember the dance language is that life is. Remember.
Well, poet's job. And you do it so well. You did it so well when you were our Poet Laureate. Let's go back to that. We didn't really talk about the map and other things that you did. Did you feel that your years as Poet Laureate were, effective, and did you get your projects done that you wanted to?
Well, it's funny, you go into it and as I was told by by my boss there, Rob Casper. It's like every poet laureate makes the job their own. I mean, we're all different, and everybody comes into it. And I came into it at a very kind of interesting time politically, and I remember when I was at the University of New Mexico. I was painting and starting to write poetry, and involved in different political actions for human rights, especially with Native people. And I said to myself, if I do anything in my life, by then I get to the end of my life, I want Native people to be seen as human beings. And the Poet Laureateship, I think, went a long way towards that. Because here, you have to be a human being to be a poet. And it opened a door in a profound way, in a way that I never would have imagined, I think. And so that was important. And so the Poet Laureate Project was part of that, was a way for people to see that, wait, there's not just one poet, there's not just one Native poet, but there are many Native poets. And so I decided to do this. I met with a lot of the departments within the Library of Congress. I wanted to see who was there and what was going on there, and they were wonderful and very generous with their time. And I always loved maps, so we settled on a map of contemporary Native poets, and we wound up with 47. We could have had hundreds, but there, capacity. It took a lot of extra time, for the maps people and the poetry and literature staff, but we put together a digital map that showcased 47 poets, which also showcased 47 places in the country. And out of that, we also have a collection now in the Library of Congress of 47 Native poets speaking about place and reading poetry.
Wonderful. But one of the 47 poets in 50 states is generally the way we would think of that. And yet what you've done in your map is to have it be boundaryless, like I mentioned earlier. There aren't any states there. How did you come to make that decision, to use geographic markers rather than political ones?
Because we were here long before the United States was the United States. We were here long before the division of, state borders. We were here, we know ourselves to be part of these lands, the waters, these mountains, and this place.
So now you are the first artist in residence at the Bob Dylan Center. What's it like?
Yeah, well, that's I helped with the opening, and it's really cool to have that center. And I think, when the center was put up, I guess it was very important to those who, helped conceptualize and put the center together, that creativity be emphasized, that we're all creative beings, and kind of give them a sense about what goes into making a song and how people make songs and record songs. And so my position, again, it's what I make it. We want to highlight other musician poets, and interface, do a lot of interfacing with the community. I was locally and even nationally. So it's pretty much, the position is just pretty much started. The center opened in early May and has had quite a number of people go through there. It's become I guess, a location for visitors to the Tulsa area.
So thanks very much, Joy Harjo. This has been an episode of Poetry is Bread, a podcast that just keeps rising. Enjoy it. See ya. I'm Bob Holman, and thank you for listening to Poetry is Bread. Subscribe to our podcast to get notifications of new episodes, or check us out at BoweryPoetry.com. The podcast is co-produced by Ram Devanini and Flavia Roja with Rataplax. The podcast series is funded by the Citizen Diplomacy Action Fund, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State with fundings provided by the U.S. government and implemented by Global Ties U.S. in partnership with the Office of Alumni Affairs and the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Additional support from New York State Council on the Arts, Governor of New York State Kathy Hochul, and the New York State Legislature. See ya.